Welcome to My Worst Memory, a workplace safe space podcast. I'm your host, Robin Cohen, founder and CEO of Happier Office and operations expert. Each episode, I'll sit down with some of the best in the business to talk about some of their worst memories. Together, we'll dissect corporate culture, leadership techniques, and scaling snafus we've lived through, so hopefully you don't have to. Today's guest is Colin Dinnie. Hey, Colin. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Colin is the Employee Experience Specialist and DEIB programs at Wistia. Colin supports all phases of the employee journey by fostering a positive, engaging, and inclusive workplace culture. He works cross-functionally to embed DEIB principles into all aspects of the organization and leverage it as a strength of the business. Thanks so much for being here, Colin. In looking at your title, DEIB programs, people may be more familiar with the term DEI. How do you differentiate DEI versus DEIB?
Sure. So essentially they are the same. However, I think we're seeing a shift towards more people including the B, which stands for belonging. So we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I believe that belonging is an outcome of inclusion. So historically people have thought of belonging as intrinsic to inclusion, or it's like a piece of it. But I think as this work has developed across a lot of different industries and more practitioners are getting savvy, it's starting to become clear that belonging is the outcome of all of those things working together.
Yeah. It can be easy with some of this work for people to feel like they're checking the boxes. Oh yeah, we're doing DEI. But when you think about the belonging, that implies that the work you're doing has value and actually impacts folks and the way that they experience working with you and your brand. And I think that is critical to think about.
Well, I mean, the way you just said it is even a more illustrative way to put it is a lot of people understand inclusion as everyone has a seat at the table. But that's not always enough. And that's also not always impactful. Like you said, checking a box, it could just be all right, let's make sure that we're hearing these opinions or these people have an opportunity to speak. What's the step after that? Belonging means that your opinion and your input and your experience and all of the things that entail that are valued and understood and heard, rather than just well, you're here, let me hear from you, and then I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway. Right? It's not just having a seat at the table, it's having a voice at the table.
I hate to say it, but in the current political landscape and corporate landscape, we're seeing a lot of companies slashing DEI initiatives, major brands, and a lot of teams, I think, are feeling pressure to follow suit. But it seems like Wistia is really doubling down on the employee experience. And I'm curious if you can talk through have you all had discussions around that internally as a people team, and how do you assess your stance on DEIB as the world is changing?
Yep. So this is kind of a two-parter. And the first part is the conversations that we've had internally. The answer to that is yes, but it's also been very brief. The conversation really was just, we're going to keep doing this, right? And the answer is yes. And that's really all there was to it.
Yeah.
With our organization, obviously people are feeling it. People are worried. People are scared. Mm-hmm. There's a great amount of uncertainty. But what we did want to do is offer an opportunity to communicate to Wistia about what we plan on doing, alleviating concern. These are the things we're not going to stop doing, because we have been doing this work for a long time. It's very easy to go with whatever way the wind blows, right? There's a part of me that understands, even though this is my job and it's very important to me personally and professionally to engage in DEIB. It's more comfortable not to, right? Because a lot of the time, this work does involve discomfort.
It's hard work. It's not just the easy roll out of bed stuff.
And it's forever work. This is not transactional work where you do something, it solves a problem, and then you move on. There's so many aspects of it. Not to get too high level philosophical about all this, but we have a lot to get to. But I think a lot of the pushback and a lot of the concern that people have about it is that people don't understand, it doesn't matter who you are, that DEIB does affect you and you are a part of it and you can benefit from it, right? I think a lot of people think that, let's be real, when people hear DEIB, they're thinking of probably just the D part, diversity, and they're probably thinking of racial diversity first, and then they're probably thinking of gender diversity second, and then anything else that entails that, they're kind of just throwing out the window.
Yeah.
Now, Of course, racial and gender diversity is very important, but
Sure.
even before we peel the lid off of equity, inclusion, and belonging, diversity, we're talking about not just racial and gender, but caregiver status, military status, accessibility, learning styles, lived experiences, professional experiences. Diversity just means not all of the same thing, right? And when you have those different perspectives, when you're driving towards business outcomes and driving towards your goals and your objectives, the different perspectives that you have really is a strength.
Absolutely.
You have all of these people that come from so many different backgrounds and their lived experiences bringing all of that to work. You're going to get really positive and strong outcomes from that. So you should always be curious and willing to accept that whatever beliefs you've had previously could be wrong, or maybe not just wrong, they just evolve. Like ideas and things like change.
Yeah.
And so we just change with it. It doesn't have to be a daunting thing.
I love the way you said just to always be curious, because I think curiosity approaches things from a lens of positive intent, whereas I think when people tend to clam up and feel really defensive, it's because they're assuming they're being attacked. It's, why are we changing? We've always done things this way. Or, well, your opinion's not right, mine is. But curiosity is really saying, oh, could you tell me more about that? I think about at a base level. So when I was at All Trails a million years ago, I was one of the first East Coast hires, and the rest of the company was all based in San Francisco. And what you were saying about diversity of thought really came into play because we were launching a product, and not only the way that the company and the brand was speaking was very West Coast, but the types of imagery that was featured in our promotions was very West Coast. It was all Yosemite, Sequoia, but on the East Coast, that's not what our national parks look like. When we go out hiking, we don't say that it was a rad experience, right? We might just say, which the amount of times I heard the word rad was a little outrageous. But that was something where when a designer and I brought it up, people were looking at us like we were aliens. We're like, no, man, it's just that everyone has different lived experiences. And for us, as someone who's from the West Coast now lives on the East Coast, I can recognize that there are differences. But if you're so in your own bubble of the way you think, you don't even imagine the possibility to challenge that. And that's a huge market that you could be missing and not resonating with because you're not thinking about things in the most diverse way possible.
I'm glad that you brought that up because it just reminded me of one of the things that our CEO, Chris Savage, had said in some of the discussions that we were having about it. It's not just about the people that you work with, it's your customer base. Wistia has a very diverse customer base. We're a local company that has a global customer base. We have folks in every continent. We have folks from all these different backgrounds. And if we're able to problem solve in a diverse way, we're able to serve our customers that span those different areas of diversity. And I think one of the coolest ways that has shown up is we're working on these dubbing features where it's allowing folks to immediately translate videos. One of the coolest things of how we did discovery on this work was having Wistians double check all of these things. Like, we have a lot of people here that speak a lot of different languages. And so we were not entirely reliant on AI and computers. We had human beings checking this work. And you only get that by having a diverse workplace.
When I think of Wistia, it definitely has this cult following for being such a playful, quirky brand. But what people maybe don't know is that y'all have been at the forefront of inclusive workspaces for years, even before it was trendy, before DEI was even an acronym that people knew about. A great representation of that is on your careers page, right? Y'all have an entire page dedicated to sharing demographic stats around the changes in the workforce, not just salaries, but the types of people who work for the company. And most places can't even share the salary on a job posting. That makes them cringe. That is the dream standard. But how do you get there? What did those conversations look like? How did you decide to share that information publicly?
Yeah, so I think probably to take it back to like the root, I do know that our co-founders, Brennan Schwartz and Chris Savage, founded Wistia on the idea that they want to do things the right way, right? And so what does that mean? I think it just means like having conviction in the things that you feel are right. But in terms of like our DEIB page and the annual report that we publish, that's another thing that we just feel like is the right thing to do because we want to be transparent about our journey and where we're at. Things that we feel like we're doing well and things that have made us successful. Also areas we have for improvement and things that we've done that didn't have the expected outcome and what we learned from it.
I love what you said about the unexpected outcomes or things that maybe you didn't do well. 'Cause when you're talking to other folks you work with or publishing to your customers, there's this pressure that everything has to be perfect. You have to have a picture perfect brand with a perfect track record, and that's not realistic, right? So I imagine sharing those imperfections also helps you resonate with a broader base of candidates. Do you get that feedback in your hiring process?
Yeah.
That folks like seeing this type of content?
Well, because it feels more human, right? Like, human beings are not perfect. I don't know how this started societally, where, well, like, everything you do has to be nailed.
Probably Instagram has something to do with it, right?
Yeah, like, I think what resonates with people, whether they know it or not, is authenticity and effort and feeling like you can see people trying and driving towards something. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now, whenever you're talking about mistakes, in this context, I think it's more about the effort that you make and then like how you correct those mistakes.
If I were listening to this, I would say, okay, that means I can only talk about a mistake if I know what I'm going to do to fix it. And I don't think that is the intended takeaway, right? It's, you can say, hey, we messed XYZ thing up and we're working to fix it, and we will hopefully have a solution soon. Your customers don't have to be these aliens that you never talk to that are foreign and don't want to interact with your brand. You can share authentically, ask for feedback.
And even then, solutioning can be iterative. When you've identified that something isn't working, you try something else. Or you try to learn from it in some way. And that might take you on a further journey. I think it's, again, it always comes back to remaining curious and like critical and open to change.
Absolutely. I'm curious, how did you get here? So you clearly have a great depth of knowledge and expertise in DEIB work. Were you always planning to go into this career path, straight out of college?
Absolutely not. I went to Berklee College of Music, so my background is in music. Primarily jazz and upright bass was my principal instrument. So nowhere near not only this work, but even like software and in the tech industry.
You didn't think you'd be working promoting video marketing software?
If you told me in 2007 when I was coming out of college that this is where I'd be, I mean, I've always been down for new things, so maybe I'd be excited by it, but I would not have expected it. I've been a measurer, not a tailor, but a measurer in a suit store. I also worked at Logan Airport, servicing the baggage claim carousels. When you are a musician and you don't always know where your next gig is coming from, you got to do whatever you can to make money. So there's been a lot of different things that I've done, but in terms of like what started steering me towards this is, for a number of years, I worked for a nonprofit that was owned and operated by AIDS Action Committee of Massachusetts. At a high level, that kind of like was my introduction into like work and advocacy for other people.
Purposeful work.
Like seeing the end goal, or like working for something that's like bigger than yourself. Now, when I got to Wistia, I was not in this role. I started on the customer support team in the summer of 2020 when we were in the midst of a global pandemic and social unrest and everything. Many businesses had to be reflective of where they were at, and we were no different. We were looking at our current 3-year vision, and we were like, is this doing what we're intending? And what we learned was that it felt a little more like a checklist than something that was scalable and sustainable and like a process-based thing that drives towards outcomes. So what we did is we spun up a DEI council that was comprised of a number of Wistians, which included me. One of my coworkers at the time, who was our former VP of people, she tapped me she wanted to pick my brain about stepping into this kind of a role full time. It was kind of a no-brainer for me. So, long journey, long story about how I got here. I would say, even though I might not have expected it a long time ago, I think like just the things that are important to me, I think was always going to lead me somewhere around this work.
That's amazing. It's such a, I don't want to say tumultuous path, but unexpected path, right? So many forks in the road that lead you to where you are today. I think about that.
Kind of just like riding the wave.
Yeah, you're riding the wave, but think about all those micro decisions that had you not made them, maybe wouldn't have gotten you to where you are. That's a side tangent for a different podcast.
Don't even get me started. I get like if I get too down that rabbit hole, I start to like get stressed because like that philosophy of every decision to do something is a decision not to do something else. Okay, and you think about how many different. See what I'm saying?
We can't go there. We can't go there. We'll be here all day.
For sure.
You had so many different functions, whether it was a gig or a different job you had. When you reflect on your time, what was your worst memory?
I mean, everybody has a number of things that are not the fondest of memories, I guess.
No.
But I
think
think
the trick with this podcast is how can we talk about it without dredging up people's trauma?
Right. For sure. And so the backdrop is it was during a review cycle, and I was engaging in a lot of different work aside from my day-to-day always on work. Doing a lot of different things, trying to push on different initiatives. And when the review cycle came around, it did not go the way that I thought. It impacted my growth, my compensation. And it didn't quite put me in the position of a PIP, a performance improvement plan, but it was like right above that. Like, you need to course correct.
Okay. You said it didn't go the way you planned. You didn't see this coming.
Not at all. And I had weekly one-to-ones with my manager. And none of this ever came up. Reviews are reflective of a larger period of time.
Yeah, it should never be a surprise, ideally.
That's the number one thing. You never want your reviews, whether it's areas for improvement or successes, none of that should be a surprise. You should know, like, yes, I nailed these things. I did this stuff. Yes, I could have done these things better. And then you unpack it in more detail once the review cycle is wrapped. And then you try to address those things in the next cycle. It was kind of shocking, if I'm going to be honest. Like,
so let's walk it back. You go into this review session. You get blindsided with a bad review that is going to affect your comp as well as your status at the company. And then you go into shock because you're not expecting any of this information.
As people, when we get like bad news, like once you hear that thing, almost anything that happens after that kind of goes out there. And for me, I was like, how could this happen? I felt good about the work I was doing. And it's one thing if you're doing something and you're unsure.
Sure.
Or you know that you're putting off something else to do the thing you want, but that wasn't really the case.
You're doing this work every week, and no one's saying anything.
Day in, day out, and everyone knows what I'm working on. Like, that's the whole point of a one-to-one is kind of like a check-in in terms of this is what I'm doing. That's what kind of blew me away in the review is so much time had passed where I could have course corrected, but I was
no one said anything.
Told otherwise, right. The conversations that we would have weekly were always centered around the work. And so what my expectation would have been, if any of that stuff is not the right thing, to then let me know. Yeah. Those priorities can shift and you have a conversation around it. But I think it's just like, it's transparency and communication, I think is the number one thing for me.
But instead you got nothing. And I imagine, a lot of folks come into companies in support roles tend to be a little more junior in their career, or at least in that transition into like corporate America. So if folks don't know the questions to ask to make sure they're doing the right work, we all have this kind of disillusioned perspective that like your manager knows more than you do, right? They know how to do their job. And I think unfortunately that is not always the case. I think a lot of managers are not given the tools. Either they don't know innately or they're not given the tools to be able to say, hey, you should be prioritizing things with your direct reports. Hey, you should be coaching.
Manager enablement is like one of the greatest plagues of professional work, right? Like we promote people into these positions and it's not even that they're bad, so to speak. They're just not enabled to succeed and be good at it. And so many managers are just kind of left to figure it out. In whatever way that you got people listening to podcasts or reading books and stuff like that. And then everyone's kind of developing a unique way of management, but without like a general baseline of expectations or foundations for a manager at a particular organization.
Yes. There's a select group of people who are innately good at EQ work, right? They get the value. They understand how to communicate. They maybe went to a lot of therapy, learned a lot of tools, went to a program, something like that. But there are so many folks who just are good at their job and they get promoted because they're good at their job and they have no business being a manager.
Like I cannot, if I could stand up and applaud on a podcast. I mean, I know it's a video podcast, so I'll
You could.
Thank you. That is like such a big piece of this is like, because you are great at your job does not mean you are a great manager. Those are two very different skill sets.
Absolutely.
So
There's so many complications that come with being promoted. If a manager is not set up for success, it will drastically impact the productivity and happiness of your workforce, right? Just looking at it from a purely numbers perspective, the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development ran a survey. They surveyed 6,000 UK employees in 2022 just to try and figure out, what is the tangible impact that bad management has on their employees. And what they found that 50% of employees with bottom quartile managers reported negative impacts on their mental health compared to just 14% of those who had a great manager. Only 30% of employees with low-rated managers were satisfied with their jobs versus 88% of folks with high-rated managers. 39% of employees with poor management felt excessive pressure or that they had to always be on. And then when you flip it, 74% of employees with top-rated managers volunteered for tasks beyond their job scope. So the folks who are happier at work that have supportive managers will actually take on and do more for you and for your company. These discrepancies in the data really show that it's not just, some humans are more motivated, some humans are more depressed, whatever. It actually comes down to the coaching you receive on a daily basis really impacts the work and the value that you bring to your organization day to day and your mental health.
100%. I think, first of all, those stats are kind of like, I don't know, it's like one of those things that when you hear it, you're like, whoa, but then when you hear why, it's not that surprising, right? It is very easy to become disengaged when you are not properly managed. And again, I do want to make it very clear that it's not always the manager's fault. Of course, sometimes it is. But it's this weird symbiotic bad relationship that if we're not enabling managers to succeed, then how can they enable their direct reports to succeed?
And what about those people managers who are in the middle, right? So I don't know how to manage folks, so my team struggles. But then I have a manager on top of me who also doesn't know how to manage. So then I'm not getting the support. And if I'm not getting the support, I can't give the support.
Yep.
And it ladders up and up, right? The higher up the chain you go, just because someone's C-suite doesn't mean they're great or they have the tools that they need to manage
super cyclical. And a lot of the time when people are growing into those roles at a particular place, if that foundation is either broken or isn't even there, then you can see how it's just perpetual. And so it just keeps happening.
And then you layer in all of the interpersonal challenges that come with just working with humans. In a best case scenario where you have a great team, everyone's performing really well, they all are value and mission aligned, you could still have challenges, let alone when there could be layoffs, there could be misaligned leadership. Add in any droplet of stress and you have this concoction that's just a mess.
Mm-hmm. And so what I will say, the review in and of itself was a very bad experience for me. It's one of the first things I think of if someone's going to ask me what was a bad experience. However, there were a lot of positives that came out of it, both for me and the manager. Because it was such a surprise to me, I kind of wanted to advocate for myself a little bit because it wasn't because I wasn't doing anything. I was doing a lot, it just wasn't the right things. So I had a skip level conversation with my manager's manager. And I wasn't trying to get anybody in trouble. I just want to let them know, this is how this happened and why I don't think it was right. And I understand that we might not be able to do anything about this looking back, but going forward, this is what I feel could be better. And that led to a good conversation with the director, but then also a very meaningful conversation with my manager at the time, where we were kind of hearing each other. They heard my concerns, and then we talked very productively about going forward and all of those things that I wanted to happen that I talked about, putting up the guardrails and helping with prioritization and checking in on whatever cadence feels right about the current work that I'm doing. And then it also kind of helped me understand a little bit more about what I can do, my part as a direct report, because I view manager and direct report relationships as collaborative rather than purely upwards. It should really feel like a collaborative effort. I was also kind of making assumptions, a no news is good news kind of thing. But what all people who report to someone should do with whatever cadence feels right that you talk about with your manager is just checking in on am I doing the right things?
You won't be able to read this because I have chicken scratch, but I just wrote down no mind reading.
Yeah, right? No mind reading. In the absence of information, people are going to make assumptions. And maybe those assumptions are right, but we know as human beings through human history, assumptions often aren't. So remove that layer of ambiguity. just have a conversation around it. And that's what I've done. And also now in my current role, that's what I do, especially with like work that is so delicate with how people feel. You're talking about inclusion and belonging. That's a hard thing to have like qualitative data on, because it's a thing that you kind of feel in your spirit, right? So I don't want to make any assumptions about like what we're doing and how that impacts the employee base. I want to ask questions. I want to have conversations. I want to check in with people.
Well, you may have hopes for what your programs are doing, but if you don't ask, you'll never know. And that, I think that can go beyond just sending an ENPS survey.
Oh, it has to. It has to. Those are good. And I think that everybody should do them. But at the same time, you don't want to wait for those opportunities to send out an engagement survey or an NPS survey, any of that stuff. Like, those are good, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Sometimes you just need to get in a room with people.
Yeah. And make a space where they feel like they can share their perspective. Yeah. Just thinking about in the context of what you shared with the manager, right? Good for you for being able to advocate for yourself. But I imagine you had to overcome some discomfort around addressing that conflict head on. So many folks are conflict averse, but if you can just push through the like 2 minutes of anxiety that you feel going into the conversation to just say, hey, this really caught me off guard. This was not my expectation. Not just venting and complaining, but shifting it to really focus on how can we move forward productively. I'm sure you saved that manager a whole bunch of work too, trying to figure out how to communicate with you, right? Because maybe from their perspective, they thought you should have known better. And it was potentially a failure on both parts, being able to ask the questions, hey, am I doing what you expect? And for them being able to articulate yes or no.
Yes, 100%. I also think that there's something you just said that I want to double click on, is that I am a person that is comfortable advocating for myself. Not everybody is. And also, sometimes people don't know how to.
Yeah.
It's a skill sometimes people just don't have, because they either don't have the experience, the confidence, or
maybe
the
they had a really great maybe they had a really great manager where they didn't have to advocate for themselves because the manager just did it for them and they never developed that skill set.
Yep. And that's why the manager direct report relationship has to be collaborative. You're always kind of looking for things you might be missing. See, our whole thing is rolling back to staying curious.
Yeah. So how do you advocate for yourself if you're someone who doesn't have that skill, or maybe you have a really challenging manager? How do you know you need to advocate for yourself?
You'll know you need to advocate for yourself if your expectations are not aligning with the outcomes based on the work that you're doing, and you know that you're doing it. But if you have these expected outcomes and there's a misalignment with how they're either being recognized or communicated, then that's when you know. And then how to do that, I think, is really dependent. Like, it depends on you, of course, and like your communication style, but also knowing your manager and how they receive information. So the way I approach it is meeting someone where they're at and in a way that they can understand as I possibly can.
Yes.
So like, I might think about how my manager generally receives information, how they generally communicate the things that they're looking for. Is this a person that likes qualitative data? Is this a person that likes just open conversation? And then you want to come with like questions that have very clear action items. What can I do to like create alignment here? Here are the things that I'm doing that I feel like I'm doing well. If any of that is wrong, or like there's something different I should be doing, what are those things? And then you make it collaborative. I think self-advocacy doesn't have to be combative, and it doesn't have to be confrontational. It's solution-based. You don't have to go and like, I'm ready to like, not fight.
Throw some bows. Yeah.
Like, you don't
Cracking
have to
skulls.
like, you don't have to come in hot. You just want to come prepared.
Yeah.
And have the right questions.
Yeah. And if you find yourself, like for some of our listeners, if you find yourself in a scenario where you don't know what those right questions are, you just got to try and start asking. Or you can be so blunt as to say to your manager, I really want, actually, this isn't blunt at all. This is just direct communication, right? Hey, I want to make our time together as valuable as possible. My goals in my career are X, Y, Z.
Yep.
From your perspective, what do I need to do to get there? And where am I not achieving those goals?
Yes.
And it's not a criticism of you. It's just give me some information. You don't have to wait for that feedback or that 6-month review to have the conversation. It could be in your one-on-one tomorrow. And just say, hey, I really want to do better. I want to be able to support you better. What are the challenges you're facing and where can I help you? I think that's a really nice way to phrase it for folks who are also maybe looking to level up a little bit. maybe they're stuck in the day-to-day, but they want to be making more of an impact with their team.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is just kind of trust your gut. If you have a question or something feels ambiguous to you or you're not sure, just ask. It starts with a conversation.
You brought up something interesting, which is a great transition to our water cooler topic. Let's talk about learning styles. So you said communicating in a way that your manager can understand. When it comes to learning styles, for folks who are less familiar, there are 4 main ways that people learn. The first is auditory, so people who learn by listening. There's visual, people who learn by seeing. There's the read-write competency, which is, imagine like the people who do really well with flashcards, right? They have to write down something and then read it back. And then there's kinesthetic learners who prefer to learn by doing. So those are the folks who you could explain something to them, but if they don't actually get up and try it themselves, they're never going to understand the practical theory. So I wonder, Colin, what is your learning style? How do you prefer to learn?
I think it depends on what it is. There's all the ways that you mentioned that learning, like I can see, depending on what it is, like I can feel that a little bit. But the first thing that jumps out to me is probably kinesthetic. I enjoy learning by doing. Some of that goes back to my music background. I never had lessons until I got to college. I just would watch videos and listen to stuff and just try to figure it out. I internalize information better when I'm doing it. So kinesthetic to me feels like it pulls a little bit of visual. Like I like to see how it's done and then try it for myself. And that's usually how I end up internalizing information best.
Yeah, you're totally right. It depends what it is, right? Like I'm a rock climber, and if I walk in somewhere and someone says, hey, how do you think you're going to approach this wall? I don't know. I just need to try it. And figure it out. If you give me the theory of put your hand here and move your foot there, yes, I'll understand it. It's not going to register. It's not going to register the same way, but it's interesting as it comes to communicating at work, because if you have a manager who is a visual learner and you're talking at them in a meeting, they may not actually be retaining anything you're saying, which is why it's really important to take notes, send an update via email in addition to communicating verbally, or to send a video with a quick snapshot of, hey, this is me talking about XYZ. Let me know if you have any questions. Here's a PowerPoint. There's so many different ways that we can communicate. And I think that's a question you can ask your manager. Get curious, like you were saying, just ask. And the same with your direct reports. Ask, how do you learn? How do you give and receive information? Because maybe they're visual and you're auditory, and then when they send you these emails, you just glaze over and you get nothing back.
And I think sometimes it's identifying those opportunities where, if you see information coming at you in a way that doesn't jive with how you generally do, call that out. Talk to your manager about it. Or sometimes it can even be at an organizational level. That's why we record all of our all hands meetings and our show and tells and stuff like that, and then send it out after, because sometimes in the moment, people can be locked in, but then stuff might happen. An opportunity to go back, or providing captions. Sometimes when people can read, they're internalizing it better. If you see an opportunity to improve functionally how information is shared and internalized, I think that's always a good thing to do.
Yeah, and I would say too, you don't want to make more work or just create busy work, but anytime you can communicate in 2 different modalities, it does help.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
Can you send that email beforehand with the bullets of what you want to talk about, so that if they have a chance to read it, they can? Can you create an experience for your employees where they can practice a skill instead of having theory talked at them? There's just great ways to help people learn better, because folks may not even know. People who aren't as into organizational behavior as we are may not have experience with these topics to even say, oh yes, I am a kinesthetic learner. My last question for you is, if you have folks who are looking to just improve their organizational health and strengthen their employee experience, where should they start?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think start with having conversations with your people. That can happen a lot of different ways. One thing that we've actually just started doing at Wistia is we're calling them culture vibe checks, where we have a random selection of 4 to 5 people with some pre-written questions to kind of get the creative juices flowing about what are the things you're proud of here? What makes you energized to come to work? What do you think could be improved here? What are the things you wish you had? So many things are solved through communication. And communication also requires trust. And trust is a very hard thing to build and a very easy thing to lose. So I think, You start with conversations, and then you start building trust with your organization for how, like, what happens with those conversations. I think the most important thing is to listen to people, to hear and see people, and like help them feel validated, even if whatever someone is voicing that they want to happen might not happen.
Yes.
Sometimes people just want to feel heard.
Yeah. I like what you said about even if it's not going to happen, acknowledging that with them. Saying, hey, I hear your feedback. This is not just lip service. We're not just asking to ask the question. We hear you. We'll take this into consideration, and let me get back to you with prioritization as to when that will happen. Or, hey, unfortunately, we're never going to be able to swing that because we don't have the budget or whatever it is. But just setting the expectations. I think that's what it comes down to with communication. Just setting expectations and sticking to what you said.
And having I desperately want to avoid a cliche, but sometimes cliches are based in truth. Reason. It's having a North Star or a why. Why are you doing what you're doing? You need to have a reason and something to anchor to. Otherwise, if you're rudderless, you can't drive towards any kind of meaningful change if you don't know what you're working toward. So
that was less cliche than I expected. That wasn't as corny as I thought you were going to go.
Yeah. It's important to know what you're aiming at. And all of the actions that you do should roll back to that.
Yes.
Have a clear understanding of what you're trying to accomplish by having these conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Make sure you have purpose behind your action. You're not just operating to operate.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Colin. This is a great
Thank you, Robin. I'm so glad you're doing this and appreciate all the work that you're doing. And also, I think it's just so awesome to see you doing your thing, like in your own way.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And likewise, always. I'm so excited for you and so glad that you made it from Logan baggage claim all the way to DEIB at Wistia. It's a huge jump. You're doing
Should be my memoir. Baggage claim to inclusion.
From passenger baggage to corporate baggage. Yeah. The Colin Dinnie story.
Wow, Robin, that was impressive, right?
Hey, man, there's a reason I worked in marketing for so long.
Yeah. Well done.
Thank you so much for being here and joining me for my Worst Memory of Workplace Safe Space podcast. I like to close out the episode with a classic cliche. As always, our door is always open. We can't wait to see you next time.
Thanks so much.